I guess I've made it as a booktuber or Twitter reviewer or something, because I've been reached out to by an anthology publication to read and review their book. This is the first, I don't know if you'd call it a collaboration, but book of which I have been prompted and given to review, so I just want to be very clear about that, because I am never someone that is going to be swayed by, let's just say, the social aspects of this sort of business. For someone that is so inherently honest as myself, I literally, if you will come to know, I cannot lie. It's very hard, and you can tell when I'm doing it. So in the future, no matter how kind or how many opportunities, say, a given company may offer me, I will never take them for the sake of the offer. I am here for honesty all the time, every day. So with that out of the way, I was given the anthology called The Toilet Zone #2 by Hellbound Books. Honestly, it's nice as someone that posts their opinion online quite a bit and kind of feel like I'm reaching out into the void to actually get someone come to me and offer me something that I would be genuinely interested in interacting with. A lot of the times you get a lot of blank emails, or not blank emails, but formulated messages from authors or publications that are just like, hey, we see you review things, do you want to review this thing? And it is absolutely so opposite to anything that you should know I would want to read if you read any of my reviews in the first place. It just goes to show that a lot of places don't put much consideration into the people that they reach out to. They're just throwing blind tethers out into the world to try and find more people to interact with their work. But Hellbound Books very clearly spent time getting to know what I would appreciate and offering me something that they thought I would like, which was just very nice. And I'm very appreciative. I like horror, I like short stories, and I am trying to get into the world of anthologies personally, but also just try to read them more rather than go very long stretches and not read anything because I finished a really huge novel and I have nothing to fill in the small time. So with The Toilet Zone #2, I'm sure you can tell they are short little horror stories that you can read on the toilet so that you may pass yourself a little bit quicker from the fear. It's a very cute concept, and I was more than happy to dive in and read some of these, because just when you put that much cute care into just naming something, I'm a sucker for that. I have not read The Toilet Zone, the first one. They offered me the second one because they are going to be coming out with the third one. I am not sure if I will be reading that one as well. They have offered, if everything goes according to they don't hate my review, more of their content in the future, but not for a little while. I'd like a little break, and I need to finish what I'm already reading. So yes, overall, The Toilet Zone is a collection of short horror stories meant to be read within short snippets. Obviously, for me as a slow reader, it took me a lot longer. This is not something that I would read in one go on the toilet, but for an average person, I can totally understand that this suits your needs. I think I would need a flash fiction collection personally, but they were the perfect length for me to read over my 40 some odd minute break at work every day, and over the last month and a half, I have finished the collection. And I have to say, just right off the bat, it was a much longer collection than I expected. Out of the few anthologies that I have read, the one that felt the most value for the quality of content and size was Local Haunts, which was a HorrorTube collection anthology. But other smaller works like Little Birds, I felt like wasn't worth the money, and I read it in one complete sitting, which wasn't optimal. It is nice that to get an anthology that is as large as a real novel, but it is full of just so many short stories that you can feed yourself over time. If you're not feeling in the mood for one type of story specifically, then you can just move on to another one of a different length. That said, in these kinds of anthologies, because you don't want to give too much away, you don't really know what each story is really going to get you into until you've started reading it, and at that point, you might as well just read it. For a larger collaborative work, I was actually surprised not to find as many errors as I expected, and all of the errors that I did find were the kind that get glossed over because it is one word missing in a very common phrase. For example, if I said something random like, "How do you feel about that?" That's a super common phrase, but for example, if I take do out of that, how you feel about that? In your head as a reader, you would inherently just stick the do in there, and I understand completely why the editors didn't find this in a collection so large. And there was just a handful of those instances. I was actually pretty impressed. They're just common little things that you happen to gloss over inherently or fill in for yourself. That's why you can't read your own work and over and over and over again and expect to actually get it edited. You have to put it down and come back to it a couple weeks later, because you're just going to do stuff like that. You're going to read what you want to read rather than what's actually there. And the only reason that I noticed these very tiny errors was because I'm a very, very slow reader. So it's much harder for me to get over them quickly, which means that I do find the missing word. The quality of stories was about average to good. Nothing really blew my socks off. I did really enjoy a couple, which I will be naming at the end of the video. There were a couple that I was a bit disinterested in for where I thought it was going. Out of all of the dozens of stories that are in this anthology, I only didn't read one of them. The one I didn't read was called Monstrous Love. I felt like the story itself didn't suit itself very well to short story format. It was a story about a recurring nightmare, and obviously you're going to assume that this nightmare is going to influence the character in their real life and somehow or another come to fruition. And the cutting and the overuse of the word blood rather than different descriptors just really highlighted the lack of experience of the writer. And there was, as I said, a gradient of different writing skills throughout this anthology, so I can't give it a bad score at all just because I didn't read one of the stories. And there were some that were generally good. And that's the thing about anthologies, is that they're very hard to grade in and of themselves, especially if it's a collaboration, because you're not just talking about how well one author themed something, or how consistent their voice was, or whether a concept was fully fleshed out through a variety of different perspectives or narratives. The Toilet Zone is completely random. There is absolutely nothing tying any of them together besides the fact that they are horror short stories. There's not like a specific paranormal theme. There isn't. One might be about a monster, one might be about a serial killer, one might just be post-apocalyptic, the other one might happen entirely in somebody's head. The anthology covers a very wide scope of different kinds of horror, and if you're into that kind of thing, then that's exactly what you get. Unfortunately for me, as I'm finding with anthologies, and I guess poetry books as well, is that even if it is by a collaboration or it's by a specific author, I'm looking for a very solid theme, or a theme that will carry through or tell a story as it transforms. This whole like mishmash of different kinds of horror stories is great when you are just picking up every now and then because you're going to the bathroom and you want just something quick to read. It is perfect for the function that it was designed for. It's just not an anthology that I personally would recommend as something that you pick up, take to the beach, and read in not necessarily one sitting, but read multiple stories at a time. You may find that you get a little bit of whiplash because you never know exactly which genre you're about to go into. And if there's a genre that you are specifically looking for, which is my problem, because if I get on one track, then I want a bit more of that, then it doesn't flow into one another at all. I feel like there was a good balance in this book of not just the quality of writing from average to good, but also the more familiar to the a bit strange. In and of that self, that did come with the quality of writer, as the lesser writer something more familiar, and the better writer something that is more abstract and unexpected. There were quite a few stories where you're going through the same sort of motions as something that you feel you've done before. For example, like you can't really rewrite what a vampire is if you are just making a quick short story about vampires. You have to use the trope that you have. Many of these stories were very tropey. One being Dear Diary was very much just a writer taking on the task of trying to tell a very common story that we've all heard before. But that doesn't in and of itself make it bad in any way. It's just not always punchy. It's more like the anthology wanted to balance itself out. There was a certain part where I was afraid that the best of the anthology had been put at the start. It was hitting like a later middle part of the book where I was quite disinterested in the stories that I was getting personally. That's just my personal opinion. I was not super into that kind of horror, but they brought it back with the last couple, so I'm pleased to say that it's not a book where I can inherently say, read the first half because it's better, or read the second half because it's better. In a lot of cases, because the style and the quality varies, there are many that I would put at a solid 3 stars, which is good, but missing something. Just that little thing over the edge. And at the same time, if you're being in a collective anthology, you don't want to be too punchy. So, like, what am I asking for? I don't know. I could go each of the stories individually, but I think in the future I will actually keep a in time of vlog of me reacting to them when I read them. Going over them now, I've been much more set apart from the first ones that I read. I don't have as close a recognition to them because that was a month and a half ago. As well, because this is an anthology that is not, like, overly well-renowned. It's not like a Stephen King horror anthology where it's okay to just rip apart this huge famous writer because what does your voice do in a pool of millions of other people that have read it? I don't want to come to each of these individual other small writers and leave a bad taste because it might have just not been their best story. Or it might have been their best story, but I don't want to start comparing each one of them to another and make it sort of a competition, because there were ones that I very clearly liked way more than other ones. So in the future, either I will turn that content into an in-time vlog, which will be much longer formatted and released on my Patreon, so it is not a direct competitive thing that I'm putting on YouTube and not seen as a rant, because it's not supposed to be a rant. I'd like to talk about things where there are improvements to be had, but I am not necessarily shitting on it. Sorry, it's just funny because I'm talking about The Toilet Zone. This is not a book that I would overly recommend, except for the purpose of, like I said, picking up a story every now and then to read and not as a whole thing. It totally earns its value that way, but on the other hand, it is not something that I personally am putting very high on my rating system, or would recommend to get over something, for example, that you would like to have a theme, a story, or like a showcasing of a specific writer. I find with these anthologies, I'm kind of reading them, and I feel like I get a feel for some of the writers, but at the same time, there was just so many of them that I didn't take the time to go and find each of them and interact with each of their content outside of this, which is the whole point of anthologies, and I'm just doing it wrong, and I completely admit that. Like, I'm doing it wrong. And I hope to change that in the future. When I do my in-time vlogs, I will sit down after each story, talk about it with you, my thoughts, my feelings, and then interact more with the author themselves outside on another platform, and perhaps engage more with their work. Of all of the stories in The Toilet Zone 2, the ones that I personally liked the most, and which I would say to read if you decide to pick it up and you only want to, like, have a couple of them. Why I Don't Drink by Sarah Canavo, Broken by Joanne Coach, Pilgrimage to the Range by Jay Baird, and You Never Can Tell by Matt Bliss. Pilgrimage to the Range by Jay Baird was just, honestly, it hit the right tone for me. It was a really nice palate cleanser after all of the short horror that I had been reading, because it was a bit more satirical, a bit more speculative fiction on the side of something a bit more grim of a topic, which I really enjoyed. And the one that I liked the most from the anthology, and not just because it is more on the theme of the anthology, as in The Toilet Zone, was Broken by Joanna Koch. I don't know what it says about me that it was my favorite. It's a little alarming. It was just so different from everything else there that it stood out. It stood out the most. What can I say? I didn't know that I needed fecal demons in my life, but here we are. So yeah, those were my thoughts on The Toilet Zone number 2. As my first, not collaboration, but the first thing that I have had outreach to me by a publication and which I got to interact with. It was a very pleasant experience, and I would hope to do it again. I am quite appreciative of the opportunity, and if anyone watching this has a small publication, or they are just an individual writer and they would like a review, and it seems like it is something that I would also personally like to read on my own time, I would definitely love to help the community out by offering reviews and interaction for your content, because that is just how we help all of We help each other out as a community, and I want to be a bigger part of that. If you enjoy my content, you can like or subscribe to my channel, pretty please. If you would like to support my content, I have a Patreon and a Buy Me a Coffee in the description below, where you may find extra content as I continue to explore anthologies, and if you want more in-depth content that doesn't quite suit YouTube, because if I went through each and every one of the stories on this, the video would probably be about an hour long, and I don't think the random viewer wants that. As always, just thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.